The first snow of December had barely touched the rooftops of Willow Creek Estates when the controversy began. For years, the neighborhood had prided itself on order. Manicured lawns, beige fences, and strictly regulated seasonal displays. The HOA, relentless in its pursuit of uniformity, treated every deviation like an act of rebellion. It was a place where even a misplaced trash can earn a warning letter. Marcus Hill, however, wasn't the kind of man to bow quietly to rules that strangled joy. He had always been the neighbor with the brightest Christmas display, the one that made children's faces light up as they drove by. His house at the end of Birchwood Lane had become a local landmark every holiday season. Each year, Marcus added something new. Twinkling arches, inflatable Santas, synchronized lights dancing to music, and people loved it. But not everyone. In mid-November, Marcus received a thin white envelope from the HOA. Inside was a formal notice. His holiday lights violated Section 14B of the association's guidelines. The display, they claimed, was excessively bright, disruptive to community aesthetics, and inconsistent with neighborhood standards. The letter ended with a cold threat: remove the lights by December 5th or face daily fines. Marcus wasn't surprised. He had heard rumblings from certain board members during the previous year's HOA meeting. They said his house drew too much traffic, that strangers driving by posed a security risk, that the flashing lights disturbed nearby homes. But Marcus knew the real issue wasn't safety, it was control. The HOA had spent years trying to tighten its grip on the smallest details of residents' lives. And now they had chosen him as an example. The first weekend of December, Marcus climbed his ladder anyway, stringing lights across every edge of his home. As neighbors walked their dogs, they smiled and waved, many of them whispering encouragement. They knew the HOA's threats weren't about community well-being, they were about power. By December 3rd, the display was nearly finished. Thousands of LEDs outlined the roofline, glowing reindeer perched on the lawn, and a massive tree shimmered in Marcus's front yard. The show wasn't just beautiful, it was a declaration. That evening, as dusk settled over Willow Creek, the lights blazed to life for the first time. Music played softly in sync, and passing cars slowed to admire the glow. Children squealed in delight, but a few blinds snapped shut along the street. Those who served on the HOA board didn't like being defied. The next morning, Marcus found another envelope taped to his door. This one wasn't a warning, it was a fine. A daily penalty, accumulating every 24 hours until the display came down. Marcus didn't even flinch. He paid it without hesitation, treating the fine as the price of principle. But deep inside, he was already planning something bigger. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. Some people supported Marcus, quietly slipping notes of encouragement into his mailbox. Others, intimidated by the HOA, avoided him altogether. By December 5th, tension hummed through Willow Creek like static in winter air. The HOA board called an emergency meeting. Their president, a sharp-tongued woman named Linda Parker, insisted that Marcus's lights were a hazard. She claimed the brightness distracted drivers and that crowds gathering in front of his house blocked the street. The board voted unanimously to escalate. They would involve county code enforcement if necessary. But Marcus was ready. He wasn't just a homeowner. He was a seasoned contractor with deep knowledge of building codes, electrical systems, and, most importantly, his legal rights. He spent hours reviewing local ordinances, documenting every step of his installation. Nothing he'd done was illegal. The HOA might have authority over lawn height and paint color, but they had no legal grounds to force him to dim his Christmas spirit. As Marcus tightened the last strands of lights along his roofline, he felt the first real surge of defiance. If the HOA wanted a battle, they would get one. But he wasn't planning to simply defend himself. He was planning to win, loudly, brightly, and spectacularly. On December 7th, his plan began to take shape. He ordered additional lights, not just a few, but thousands. He bought a commercial-grade sound system, programmable controllers, and an enormous sign to display messages. If the HOA thought his house was bright now, they hadn't seen anything yet. The neighbors whispered and speculated as trucks delivered box after box to his driveway. Some cheered him on. Others worried about retaliation from the board. But Marcus had already crossed the point of no return. This wasn't just about Christmas lights anymore. It was about standing up to an HOA that bullied people into silence. By December 10th, Birchwood Lane no longer looked like the quiet cul-de-sac it had been. News of Marcus's defiance started to spread beyond the neighborhood. Social media posts circulated pictures of his glowing display. Local reporters sniffed out the story, intrigued by the idea of a Christmas lights war in an upscale subdivision. Inside HOA headquarters, a modest conference room attached to the clubhouse, panic set in. They realized Marcus wasn't backing down. Every letter they sent only seemed to make his display brighter. Every fine they issued became a badge of honor. And now, they were becoming the villains in a story that was attracting outside attention. The air grew colder, the snow thicker, and the battle lines sharper. Marcus was no longer simply decorating his house. He was building something unforgettable, something that would force the HOA to reckon with more than just holiday cheer. The question wasn't whether the HOA would fight back. It was how far they were willing to go. And as Marcus connected the final wires of his massive expansion, he was already imagining their faces when they saw what he had planned for the grand reveal. The neighborhood was about to be lit up like never before, and the real war had only just begun. By the second week of December, Birchwood Lane looked less like a quiet suburban street and more like a festival ground in the making. Delivery trucks kept stopping in front of Marcus Hill's home, unloading crates of commercial-grade lights, power converters, and towering decorations. Each evening, Marcus worked well past midnight, climbing ladders in the bitter cold, wrapping trees, outlining every fence post, and wiring an elaborate synchronization system that pulsed to the beat of holiday music. The HOA board members drove by in unmarked cars, snapping photos in the dark, their headlights off. They thought Marcus didn't notice, but he always did. He saw the silhouettes of people sitting in their vehicles, cameras raised, documenting every wire, every bulb, every perceived violation. The board thought they were building a case to crush him with fines and legal action. In reality, Marcus was building something far more powerful than they could have imagined. Not just a light show, but a statement. The first night of his expanded display was unforgettable. When the sun dipped below the horizon on December 12th, Marcus threw the main breaker. Thousands of LED bulbs exploded to life, forming a dazzling wave of color that rippled across his house, yard, and driveway. Trees shimmered in sync with the pounding beat of a holiday classic, while giant snowflakes traced patterns across his roofline. A 15-foot-tall digital sign flashed glowing messages. "Merry Christmas to all." And moments later, HOA can't stop the cheer. The neighborhood erupted with excitement. Families poured onto sidewalks to watch the show. Cars lined the street, their occupants cheering and honking in rhythm. But for every smiling face, there was a scowl hidden behind closed curtains. Linda Parker, the HOA president, and her closest allies seethed in silence. They claimed the display was reckless, dangerous, even un-American, though none of those accusations held up to scrutiny. Within 24 hours, Marcus received another official letter, this time threatening legal action. The HOA alleged that his lights caused traffic congestion and endangered pedestrians. They demanded he take everything down immediately or face a lawsuit. Marcus read the letter carefully, then filed it away with the others. He wasn't intimidated. In fact, he doubled his efforts. The more the HOA pushed, the more support Marcus received from ordinary neighbors. Strangers delivered hot coffee to his porch while he worked. Someone anonymously slipped an envelope of cash into his mailbox with a note that said simply, "Keep going." A local blogger caught wind of the feud and wrote a post titled "The Christmas Rebel of Willow Creek." By the next day, regional news crews showed up with cameras, asking Marcus why he refused to comply. He told them the truth. He wasn't breaking any laws, just standing up for his right to celebrate. And if the HOA didn't like it, they could take him to court. His calm defiance made for good television. Clips of his glowing house hit social media and spread quickly. Suddenly, Marcus wasn't just a man with a bright lawn. He was a symbol of resistance against overbearing HOAs everywhere. But the attention only enraged Linda Parker and her board allies further. They called an emergency meeting in the clubhouse. There, they outlined a plan to escalate. They would try to involve the county zoning board, calling Marcus's display a public nuisance. They discussed whether to petition the local sheriff to issue citations for obstructing traffic. Their goal was simple: overwhelm Marcus with pressure until he caved. They underestimated him. Marcus wasn't just stubborn, he was strategic. He began mapping out his next phase of the display. Instead of shutting down, he wired additional power sources, carefully balancing circuits to avoid overload. He added synchronized fireworks-style strobes, laser projections that painted glowing Christmas patterns across nearby rooftops, and even fake snow machines to create flurries drifting over the crowd. Each night, more people came to see it. Cars now lined up for blocks. The HOA's attempt to suppress the display had turned it into a regional attraction. Not everyone was thrilled. Some neighbors, worried about retaliation from the board, avoided speaking to Marcus in public, though they secretly admired his courage. A few board loyalists began spreading rumors, claiming Marcus was illegally tapping into city power lines, accusing him of blocking emergency vehicles, even whispering that he was profiting off the attention. None of it was true. As the second weekend of December rolled around, the situation hit a boiling point. A news crew filmed a live segment right in front of Marcus's house, capturing not only the glittering lights but also the growing crowd of spectators. The story aired that evening on the local station, framing Marcus as a holiday hero battling an unreasonable HOA. The following morning, Marcus awoke to find something chilling. A hand-delivered note, not from the HOA, but from someone anonymous. It warned him that accidents happen when people don't cooperate. The handwriting was jagged, almost frantic. Marcus took a deep breath and locked it away with his other documents. This wasn't just a petty neighborhood dispute anymore. The stakes were higher than he'd imagined. Despite the threat, Marcus didn't flinch. If anything, he saw it as proof he was winning. The HOA had lost control of the narrative. What began as an attempt to force a man to dim his lights was turning into a public relations nightmare for the board. But Marcus also knew this meant they'd stop at nothing to shut him down. That night, when the music roared and the lights danced brighter than ever, Marcus stood across the street watching. The show had grown so powerful it lit up half the cul-de-sac like midday. Children ran laughing through the artificial snow. Cars lined up for photographs. And in the distance, Marcus saw Linda Parker's SUV idling with its headlights off, watching everything unfold. The battle lines were now unmistakable. This wasn't simply about Christmas lights. It was about freedom, power, and control over an entire community. And Marcus was determined to see it through, no matter how ugly it got. The more Marcus's display grew, the more the HOA's anger deepened. By mid-December, Willow Creek Estates was no longer just a quiet suburban neighborhood. It had become the epicenter of a local spectacle. Cars lined the street nightly, reporters hovered nearby with cameras rolling, and drones occasionally buzzed overhead to capture footage of the dazzling synchronized light show. To Marcus, it was vindication. He had spent countless hours wiring the display to perfection, programming music, and making sure every bulb shone with flawless precision. But to Linda Parker and the rest of the HOA board, it was open defiance. They believed Marcus was mocking them, using Christmas cheer as a weapon against their authority. The board decided it was time to strike back. At their emergency meeting, they outlined a multi-pronged plan to pressure Marcus into submission. First, they increased the fines against his property to the maximum amount allowed by their bylaws, piling daily penalties on top of the ones he already owed. Next, they hired a private attorney to draft legal threats far more intimidating than the standard boilerplate notices. Then came their boldest move yet. They reached out to the county zoning board, claiming Marcus's display constituted an unpermitted commercial attraction and posed safety hazards by drawing excessive traffic. The HOA presented photos of crowded streets and even fabricated claims that ambulances had been unable to pass. Their hope was to convince county officials to shut Marcus down with a cease and desist order. But Marcus had anticipated this. He spent hours reviewing zoning laws, photographing every angle of his street to prove it remained passable, and gathering signed statements from supportive neighbors who refuted the HOA's accusations. He even installed his own security cameras, not just to protect his property from vandalism but also to capture clear evidence of any false claims the HOA tried to make. Meanwhile, tension in the neighborhood reached a breaking point. Residents who once avoided taking sides were now being forced to choose. Some feared retaliation if they spoke against the HOA, while others openly supported Marcus, offering to help with setup or donating to cover his growing fines. Local businesses began taking notice too, providing discounts on equipment and lending a hand with installation in exchange for a shout-out on social media. The HOA, realizing Marcus's resolve was unshakable, tried a different tactic: intimidation. One night, Marcus woke to find several strands of his lights cut clean through, as if someone had used heavy shears. His front yard decorations had been knocked over, and tire tracks scarred his lawn. Marcus calmly replaced the damaged equipment, restoring the display in a single afternoon. But now, he knew this wasn't just about fines and legal letters. Someone was willing to sabotage his property to win this war. The HOA denied involvement, of course. Linda Parker even issued a statement to local news outlets claiming the board condemned vandalism of any kind, while still accusing Marcus of being a menace to the neighborhood. But Marcus wasn't fooled. He checked his camera footage and caught blurry images of a figure near his property late at night. The evidence wasn't clear enough to prove guilt, but it confirmed his suspicions. Someone from the board, or at least one of their supporters, was crossing the line. Rather than retreat, Marcus pushed forward harder than ever. He launched the third phase of his display, adding towering LED candy canes, a massive animated Santa sleigh flying across his roof, and even brighter floodlights synchronized with a booming sound system. The spectacle could be seen from half a mile away, attracting even more visitors each night. The HOA's attempts to suppress him had only amplified his cause, and now Marcus's story was spreading beyond the county. Regional news stations aired segments on the Christmas lights showdown, framing Marcus as the underdog hero standing up to an overbearing HOA. Soon, national outlets began calling. Producers from morning talk shows requested interviews. Online videos of the display went viral, racking up millions of views and drawing comments from across the country. People everywhere were choosing sides, and most of them sided with Marcus. This sudden fame put the HOA in an uncomfortable position. They were no longer dealing with a simple neighborhood dispute. They were under public scrutiny, painted as the villains of a holiday drama. Yet Linda Parker remained defiant. She convinced the board to authorize a lawsuit, drafting paperwork to file an injunction against Marcus on grounds of public nuisance. Marcus was ready. He retained his own attorney, a seasoned property rights lawyer who immediately countered the HOA's claims. They argued Marcus was within all local laws and that the HOA was abusing its authority to suppress personal expression. While legal filings moved forward, Marcus kept his display running every single night, refusing to let fear or intimidation steal his momentum. But behind the glowing lights and smiling crowds, Marcus felt the weight of the conflict. His mailbox overflowed with letters, some supportive, others hostile. The anonymous threats continued, growing darker in tone. He knew the HOA was getting desperate, and desperate people made reckless moves. By the third week of December, county inspectors finally arrived to investigate the HOA's complaints. They walked the property, checked wiring, measured light levels, and reviewed traffic patterns. Marcus cooperated fully, confident that he had done everything by the book. When the inspection ended, the officials left without issuing any violations. The HOA's attempt to shut him down through county authorities had failed completely. That evening, as Marcus watched the crowd gather on Birchwood Lane for another night of music and lights, he noticed Linda Parker standing at the far end of the street, flanked by two other board members. Their faces were rigid with fury as they watched cars cheerfully lining up for the show. Marcus could almost feel their resentment radiating across the cul-de-sac. The war had escalated beyond control. What started as a simple HOA notice had transformed into a legal battle, a neighborhood divided, and a national story. and Marcus knew the next move would be the most dangerous yet. By the week before Christmas, Willow Creek Estates no longer resembled the tidy, rule-bound subdivision it once was. What began as a simple holiday display had transformed into a neighborhood war under the glow of thousands of synchronized lights. Marcus Hill's house was no longer just a festive landmark. It was now a symbol of defiance that drew crowds from miles away. Every night, cars lined the streets in both directions, their headlights reflecting off snowbanks as visitors rolled down windows to watch the show. Children squealed as artificial snow drifted through the air. News vans idled nearby to capture live footage of the spectacle. The display had become so famous that even people from neighboring towns made the trip just to see it. But as Marcus's audience grew, so did the HOA's rage. Linda Parker, determined not to lose face, led the board into its most aggressive campaign yet. Daily fines escalated into thousands of dollars. Legal threats grew longer and more venomous. And now, the board wasn't just fighting Marcus with letters and meetings, they were rallying residents to turn against him. Pamphlets began appearing in mailboxes accusing Marcus of endangering children, lowering property values, and draining neighborhood resources. The flyers were laced with exaggerated claims and grainy photos of blocked streets, supposedly caused by his visitors. A small faction of neighbors, fearful of the HOA or resentful of the attention, began parroting these talking points, quietly spreading hostility. Marcus, however, didn't flinch. He had prepared for this escalation. He documented every false accusation, kept his property spotless, and even hired an off-duty security guard to help manage traffic during peak viewing hours. His attorney continued filing responses to the HOA's lawsuit, pointing out how their own actions bordered on harassment. Then came the moment Marcus had feared: real sabotage. One night, just after midnight, his security cameras caught a hooded figure sneaking across the lawn. The intruder yanked out extension cords, slashed several wires, and tried to overturn one of the massive lighted reindeer. The damage was extensive, but Marcus was ready with backups. By the next evening, every wire was replaced, and the display was shining brighter than ever. When the footage hit the local news, the narrative shifted sharply against the HOA. The story was no longer about a dispute over holiday lights. It had become a question of safety and ethics. Viewers wanted to know who in Willow Creek Estates would stoop so low. Even those who had once stayed neutral began to rally behind Marcus. But Linda Parker refused to back down. If anything, the board's tactics grew more desperate. They sent letters warning Marcus's supporters that aiding and abetting violations of HOA rules could lead to action against them too. They threatened to tow any vehicle parked too long near his property. They even tried to organize a petition to have Marcus's display declared a public hazard, hoping to pressure the local sheriff into intervening. Through it all, Marcus kept working. His focus sharpened, and his display evolved into something truly breathtaking. On December 21st, he unveiled his masterpiece. A full-scale light show synchronized to a medley of Christmas music, complete with digital animations projected across his house. A towering LED tree that pulsed to the beat, and a giant glowing banner that read, "Merry Christmas, Willow Creek." The show drew hundreds of spectators, many standing in the snow for hours just to see it. Cars honked in time with the music, and children danced in the artificial snowfall. Social media videos of the event went viral overnight, gathering millions of views. National morning shows invited Marcus for interviews. Strangers from across the country sent letters and donations to cover his mounting fines. This overwhelming public support made the HOA's fight look even more petty. News crews tried to interview Linda Parker, but she dodged cameras, refusing to speak on record. Inside closed-door meetings, the board argued fiercely over how to proceed. Some members worried they were destroying their own credibility by pushing so hard against Marcus. Others wanted to double down, convinced that if they let him win, they'd lose all authority over the neighborhood. Marcus could sense they were reaching a breaking point. The HOA's efforts to intimidate him were backfiring, but he knew the board still had one last card to play: legal action. If they succeeded in convincing a judge to issue an injunction, he could be forced to shut down his display entirely. His attorney warned that the hearing would likely be scheduled within days, right before Christmas Eve. As Marcus prepared for court, the atmosphere in Willow Creek Estates grew more tense than ever. Supporters lined the sidewalks to protect his property. Neighbors who had once stayed silent began openly criticizing the HOA. And yet, late at night, Marcus could still feel eyes watching him from darkened driveways and idling vehicles. The war over Christmas lights had started as a neighborhood dispute, but it was now something far bigger. It had become a battle over personal freedom, over who truly controlled what happened behind the doors and fences of Willow Creek Estates. With the holiday only days away, Marcus worked tirelessly to keep his show running, knowing that every night it stayed lit was another victory. Yet, in the back of his mind, he wondered how far the HOA was willing to go to win. The hearing date was set for December 23rd. The board was ready to argue that Marcus's display was dangerous, disruptive, and unlawful. Marcus was ready to prove them wrong, but he also knew that victory in court wouldn't come easily. And as the lights of Birchwood Lane glowed brighter than ever, the real showdown loomed just over the horizon. The morning of December 23rd dawned cold and gray, the streets of Willow Creek blanketed by a fresh layer of snow. The holiday cheer that normally filled the neighborhood at this time of year was replaced by tension so thick it seemed to hang in the air. Residents peeked from their windows, watching Marcus Hill load a briefcase into his truck and drive toward the county courthouse. The HOA had succeeded in getting their hearing scheduled just before Christmas Eve, a calculated move meant to cripple Marcus's display when it mattered most. Their legal filing painted a grim picture of Birchwood Lane, a street allegedly choked with traffic, emergency vehicles supposedly unable to pass, and residents living in fear of the crowds his lights attracted. They called it a public hazard. They called Marcus a menace. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the benches, their cameras waiting for the moment the judge would enter. Residents from Willow Creek had come too, some supporting Marcus, others hoping to see him finally put in his place. At the front of the room, Linda Parker sat stiffly with the HOA's attorney, her expression cold and unwavering. Marcus's own lawyer, a calm but formidable advocate, presented a different story. He laid out meticulous evidence showing that every strand of lights met safety codes, that streets remained clear for emergency access, and that traffic was well managed thanks to off-duty security helping direct cars. He produced photos, signed affidavits from supportive neighbors, and even inspection reports proving Marcus had violated no local ordinances. The judge listened carefully, occasionally glancing over at the television crews filming outside. This wasn't just another HOA complaint, it had become a public spectacle. What might have been a routine ruling now carried the weight of national attention. After hours of testimony, the decision came down. The court would not issue an injunction. Marcus's display was lawful, properly maintained, and well within his rights as a homeowner. The HOA's motion was denied. News of the ruling spread instantly. By the time Marcus stepped out of the courthouse, cameras were flashing, microphones thrust toward his face. His victory wasn't just legal, it was symbolic. Across the country, people were cheering for the man who refused to bow to an HOA's bullying. Social media erupted with praise, and donations poured in to cover his mounting fines. But if Marcus thought the battle was over, he was mistaken. The HOA was humiliated, and humiliation can make people reckless. Linda Parker stormed out of the courtroom without speaking to reporters, her face pale with fury. Back at Willow Creek Estates, she convened an emergency meeting behind closed doors. Whatever plan they formed that afternoon, Marcus wasn't privy to it, but he could feel the hostility radiating through the neighborhood as he returned home. That night, his display lit up brighter than ever. Thousands of bulbs pulsed to the rhythm of carols, digital snowflakes danced across his rooftop, and artificial flurries swirled in the freezing air. Crowds lined the streets, their cheers echoing across the cul-de-sac. The victory in court had turned Marcus into a local hero. Yet as joyous as the evening felt, Marcus remained wary. He noticed unfamiliar cars parked at odd hours, people lingering longer than usual at the edge of his property. The anonymous threats that had trickled in earlier now arrived daily, stuffed into his mailbox or slipped under his door. Some warned that the HOA wasn't done yet. Others hinted at consequences far worse than fines or lawsuits. In response, Marcus tightened his security even further. He installed additional cameras, motion sensors, and floodlights around his home. Supportive neighbors offered to watch over the property at night. Still, he slept lightly, aware that winning in court might only push his opponents to take matters into their own hands. The morning of December 24th, Christmas Eve, brought a strange stillness to Willow Creek. The HOA had gone quiet. No letters, no calls, no new legal filings. To Marcus, it felt less like surrender and more like the calm before a storm. He spent the day making final adjustments to his display, determined to give the neighborhood, and everyone watching online, the best show yet. As the sun set, Birchwood Lane filled with cars and families once again. The lights burst to life in a dazzling spectacle, synchronized perfectly to music, glowing brighter than ever against the snowy backdrop. Reporters stood by with cameras rolling, ready to capture the Christmas Eve finale of a story that had captured national attention. But somewhere in the crowd, Marcus sensed a different energy. He saw Linda Parker's SUV creeping along the street, headlights dimmed, her expression unreadable as she passed. Other board members stood at a distance, watching silently. They didn't approach, didn't shout, didn't even hand out pamphlets as they had before. They simply observed, as if waiting for something. Marcus's heart pounded as he scanned the street. He didn't know what they were planning, but he knew the HOA wasn't finished. Not yet. What happened next would turn a neighborhood feud into a full-blown crisis, one that no amount of Christmas cheer could hide. The neighborhood had been living in a surreal state of conflict for weeks. The once quiet cul-de-sac had become a battlefield lit by a million twinkling bulbs and fueled by resentment. By now, the story had broken far beyond the small suburban enclave. Local newspapers ran features about the Christmas light war. A regional TV crew had even arrived with cameras, interviewing neighbors and capturing wide panning shots of the dazzling display. For some residents, the attention was exhilarating. For others, humiliating. As December reached its peak, the homeowner who had started it all, once defiant, now weary, knew that the grand finale had to outshine everything he'd done before. He had poured every ounce of energy into creating the biggest synchronized light show the neighborhood had ever seen. The front yard looked like something straight out of a holiday movie. Massive candy canes lined the sidewalk, glowing reindeer stood sentinel on the lawn, and an enormous LED Santa towered near the driveway, waving mechanically to passing cars. Thousands of bulbs pulsed to the beat of holiday classics blasting from hidden speakers. The show had grown so large it snarled traffic every night, with cars lined up for blocks just to see it. The HOA, desperate to regain control, had called emergency meetings. They filed injunctions, sent certified letters, even threatened steep daily fines. But the homeowner ignored them all. He had the support of fans far beyond the neighborhood, people donating money online to help him pay any penalties, cheering him on as the underdog standing up to petty authority. The HOA underestimated just how quickly the story would snowball. Their threats, intended to scare him into submission, only made him more determined and more famous. By Christmas Eve, tension had reached its breaking point. The HOA president patrolled the street like a sentry, taking photos of the display, muttering under her breath, and warning spectators to leave. Some neighbors had grown hostile too, furious about the traffic jams, the glare of lights invading their windows, and the nightly car horns blaring in time with the music. Others, however, were thrilled, setting up lawn chairs to watch the spectacle, handing out hot cocoa to visitors, and treating the event like a community festival. That night, the homeowner triggered his ultimate show. The lights flashed faster, the speakers boomed louder, and fireworks burst into the sky above the house in perfect rhythm with the music. People cheered, cameras rolled. Even passing police cars slowed down to watch, officers shaking their heads but doing nothing to stop it. Then, just as the finale built to its crescendo, the inevitable happened. The HOA president, red-faced and shaking with anger, stormed onto the property waving a clipboard full of violation notices. Neighbors shouted for her to get off the lawn, but she ignored them. Her voice was drowned out by the music, her gestures illuminated by the blinding strobe of thousands of LEDs. She ripped down a strand of lights near the walkway, triggering a cascade of sparks as wires tore free. The crowd gasped, and then came the sound no one expected, the sharp crack of overloaded circuits blowing at once. The lights dimmed, flickered wildly, and then exploded back on at full power, brighter than ever. In that instant, the entire block lit up as if it were noon in the middle of the night. The surge tripped power in 3 neighboring houses, leaving them in darkness while the main display roared on. News crews captured every second. The HOA president's furious attempt to shut it down had done the opposite. It had turned the moment into pure chaos and drama, perfect for television. Within hours, the footage spread online, with captions like, "HOA meltdown goes viral," and "Christmas showdown of the year." By Christmas morning, the story wasn't just local. It was national. Reporters camped outside the house. Talk shows debated the conflict. Was the homeowner a hero defending holiday spirit, or a selfish neighbor ignoring the rules? Was the HOA protecting property values or just abusing power? Everyone had an opinion, and the video clips fueled the fire. Under immense public pressure, the HOA caved. Their legal threats suddenly seemed laughable in the face of national scrutiny. They rescinded their fines and quietly announced they would be reviewing holiday decoration policies in the future. The homeowner emerged victorious, celebrated by strangers, and embraced by neighbors who had once doubted him. Ironically, the battle that began as a bitter feud ended up bringing people together. The once divided street united to host an impromptu block party for New Year's Eve. Food trucks lined the road, music played, and even those who had complained the loudest admitted that the display had brought joy during a dark winter. The homeowner toned down the lights for the party, letting everyone enjoy the glow without the deafening music. As midnight struck and fireworks filled the sky, not from his lawn this time, but from the city display overhead, the neighborhood cheered together. The HOA president, humiliated and silent, slipped away into the night, while the man who had refused to back down smiled quietly to himself. What started as a petty dispute over Christmas lights had turned into a story that lit up the entire country. And so, as the decorations came down weeks later, a strange peace settled over the neighborhood. The war was over, but the legend of the man who lit up his entire block to stand up to the HOA, that would live on for years. 1.